My name is Joseph Shaw, and the person that I have selected is William Wilberforce. William Wilberforce, born August 24th, 1759 in Hull, Yorkshire, England. He died July 29th, 1833 in London. William Wilberforce was a British politician and philanthropist who from 1787 was prominent in the struggle to abolish the slave trade and then to abolish slavery itself in British overseas possessions. Wilberforce's abolition was derived in part from evangelical Christianity, to which he was converted in 1784 and 85. His spiritual advisor became John Newton, a former slave trader who had repented and who had been the pastor at Wilberforce's church when he was a child. In 1787, Wilberforce helped to found a society for the reformation of manners called the Proclamation Society to suppress the publication of obscenity, and the Society for Effecting the Abolition of the Slave Trade, the latter more commonly called the Anti-Slavery Society. He and his associates Thomas Clarkson, Granville Sharp, Henry Thornton, Charles Grant, Edward James Eliot, and Zachary Macaulay and James Stephen were first called the Saints, and afterward from 1797 the Clapham sect, of which Wilberforce was the acknowledged leader. In the House of Commons, Wilberforce was an eloquent and defatigable sponsor of anti-slavery legislation. In 1789, he introduced 12 resolutions against the slave trade and gave what many newspapers at the time considered among the most eloquent speeches ever delivered in the Commons. Mr. Wilberforce now rose and said, this is part of his speech, "When I consider the magnitude of the subject which I am to bring before the House, a subject in which the interest not of this country nor of Europe alone, but of the whole world, and of prosperity are involved, and when I think at the same time on the weakness of the advocate who has undertaken this great cause, when these reflections press upon my mind, it is impossible for me not to feel both terrified and concerned at my own inadequacy to such a task. But when I reflect, however, on the encouragement which I have had through the whole course of a long and laborious examination of this question, and how much candor I have experienced, and how conviction has increased within my own mind in proportion as I have advanced in my labors, when I reflect especially that however adverse any gentleman may now be, yet we shall all be of one opinion in the end. When I turn myself to these thoughts, I take courage. I especially determined to forget all my other fears, and I march forward with a firmer step in the full assurance that my cause will bear me out, and that I shall be able to justify, upon the clearest principles, every resolution in my hand, the avowed end of which is the total abolition of the slave trade. I wish exceedingly in the outset to guard both myself and the House from entering into the subject with any sort of passion. It is not their passions I shall appeal to. I ask only for their cool and impartial reason, and I wish not to take them by surprise, but to deliberate, point by point, upon every part of this question. I mean not to accuse anyone, but to take shame upon myself in common, indeed, with the whole Parliament of Great Britain, for having suffered this horrid trade to be carried on under their authority. We are all guilty. We ought all to plead guilty, and not to exculpate ourselves by throwing the blame on others, and I therefore deprecate every kind of reflection against the various description of people who are more immediately involved in this wretched business." In the House of Commons, Wilberforce was an eloquent and defatigable sponsor of anti-slavery legislation. In 1789, he introduced 12 resolutions against the slave trade and gave what many newspapers at the time considered among the most eloquent speeches ever delivered in the Commons. In 1807, the 1807 statute did not, however, change the legal position of persons enslaved before its enactment, and so, after several years in which Wilberforce was concerned with other issues, he and Sir Thomas Buxton urged from 1821 the immediate emancipation of all slaves. In 1823, he aided in organizing and becoming a vice president of the Society for the Mitigation and Gradual Abolition of Slavery. Throughout the British dominions, again, more commonly called the Anti-Slavery Society. Turning over to Buxton the parliamentary leadership of the abolition movement, he retired from the House of Commons in 1825. On July 26, 1833, the Slavery Abolition Act was passed by the Commons. It became law the following month. 3 days later, Wilberforce died. He was interred at Westminster Abbey.